So this new section is called the homing instinct, but just to recap from the sentence of the last section, some people, in short, never do adjust adequately. In other words, they don't adjust adequately to moving home. The homing instinct. Even when they do, however, they are no longer the same as before, for any relocation of necessity destroys a complex webwork of old relationships and establishes a set of new ones. It is this disruption that, especially if repeated more than once, breeds the loss of commitment that many writers have noted among the high mobiles. The person on the move is ordinarily in too much of a hurry to put down roots in any one place. Thus, an airline executive is quoted as saying he avoids involvement in the political life of his community because in a few years I won't even be living here. You plant a tree and you never see it grow. This non-involvement, or at best limited participation, has been sharply criticised by those who see in it a menace to the traditional idea of grassroots democracy. They overlook, however, an important reality: the possibility that those who refuse to involve themselves deeply in community affairs may be showing greater moral responsibility than those who do and then move away. The movers boost a tax rate, but avoid paying the piper because they are no longer there. They help defeat a school bond issue and then leave the children of others to suffer the consequences. Does it not make more sense, is it not more responsible, to disqualify oneself in advance? Yet if one does withdraw from participation, refusing to join organisations, refusing to establish close ties with neighbours, refusing, in short, to commit oneself, what happens to the community and the self? Can individuals or society survive without commitment? Commitment takes many forms. One of these is attachment to place. We can understand the significance of mobility only if we first recognise the centrality of fixed place in the psychological architecture of traditional man. This centrality is reflected in our culture in innumerable ways. Indeed, civilization itself began with agriculture, which meant settlement, an end at last to the dreary treks and migrations of the Paleolithic nomad. The very word rootedness, to which we pay so much attention today, is agricultural in origin. The pre-civilized nomad, listening to a discussion of roots, would scarcely have understood the concept. The notion of roots is taken to mean a fixed place, a permanently anchored home. In a harsh, hungry and dangerous world, home, even when no more than a hovel, came to be regarded as the ultimate retreat, rooted in the earth, handed down from generation to generation, one's link with both nature and the past. The immobility of home was taken for granted, and literature overflows with reverent references to the importance of home. Seek home for rest, for home is best, are lines from Instructions to Housewifery, a 16th century manual by Thomas Tusser, and there are dozens of what one might, at the risk of a terrible pun, call homilies embedded in the culture. A man's home is his castle. There's no place like home. Home sweet home. The syrupy glorification of home reached perhaps a climax in 19th century England, at precisely the time that industrialism was uprooting the rural folk and converting them into urban masses. Thomas Hood, the poet of the poor, tells us that each heart is whispering home, home at last. And Tennyson paints a classically cloying picture of an English home, grey twilight poured on dewy pastures, dewy trees, softer than sleep, all things in order stored, a haunt of ancient peace. In a world churned by the Industrial Revolution and in which all things were decidedly not in order stored, home was the anchorage, the fixed point in the storm. If nothing else, At least it could be counted upon to stay in one place. Alas, this was poetry, not reality, and it could not hold back the forces that were to tear man loose from fixed location. The demise of geography. The nomad of the past moved through blizzards and parching heat, always pursued by hunger, but he carried with him his buffalo hide tent, his family, and the rest of his tribe. He carried his social setting with him, and as often as not the physical structure that he called home. In contrast, the new nomads of today leave the physical structure behind. It becomes an entry in the table showing the turnover rate for things in their lives. And they leave all but their family, the most immediate social setting, behind. The downgrading of the importance of place, the decline in commitment to it, is expressed in scores of ways. A recent example was the decision of Ivy League colleges in the United States to de-emphasize geographical considerations in their admissions policies. These elite colleges traditionally applied geographical criteria to applicants, deliberately favouring people from homes located far from their campuses in the hopes of assembling a highly diversified student body. Between the 1930s and the 1950s, for example, Harvard cut in half the percentage of its students from homes in New England and New York. Today, says an official of the university, we're pulling back on this geographical distribution thing. Place, it is now recognised, is no longer a primary source of diversity. Differences between people no longer correlate closely with geographical background. The address on the application form may be purely temporary anyway. Many people no longer stay in one place long enough to acquire distinctive regional or local characteristics. Says the Dean of Admissions at Yale, of course, we still send our recruiting people to out-of-the-way places like Nevada, but there's really as much diversity in taking Harlem, Park Avenue and Queens. According to this official, Yale has virtually dropped geography altogether as a consideration in selection, and his counterpart at Princeton reports, it is not the place they're from really, but rather some sense of a different background that we're looking for. Mobility has stirred the pot so thoroughly that the important differences between people are no longer strongly a place-related occurrence. So far has the decline in commitment to place gone, according to Professor John Dickman of the University of Pennsylvania, that allegiance to a city or state is even now weaker for many than allegiance to a corporation, a profession, or a voluntary association. Thus it might be said that commitments are shifting from place-related social structures, city, state, nation or neighbourhood, to those corporation, profession, friendship, network related, that are themselves mobile, fluid, and for all practical purposes, placeless. Commitment, however, appears to correlate with duration of relationship. Armed with a culturally conditioned set of durational expectancies, we have all learned to invest with emotional content those relationships that appear to us to be permanent or relatively long-lasting, while withholding emotion as much as possible from short-term relationships. There are, of course, exceptions. The swift summer romance is one, but in general, across a broad variety of relationships, the correlation holds. The decline in commitment to place is thus related not to mobility per se, but to a concomitant of mobility, the shorter duration of place relationships. In 70 major United States cities, for example, including New York, average residence in one place is less than 4 years. Contrast this with the lifelong residence in one place characteristic of the rural villager. Moreover, residential relocation is critical in determining the duration of many other place relationships, so that when an individual terminates his relationship with a home, he usually also terminates his relationship with all kinds of satellite places in the neighbourhood. He changes his supermarket, gas station, bus stop and barber shop, thus cutting short a series of other place relationships along with the home relationship. Across the board, therefore, we not only experience more places in the course of a lifetime, but on average maintain our link with each place for a shorter and shorter interval. Thus we begin to see more clearly how the accelerative thrust in society affects the individual, for this telescoping of man's relationships with place precisely parallels the truncation of his relationship with things. In both cases, the individual is forced to make and break his ties more rapidly. In both cases, the level of transience rises. In both cases, he experiences a quickening of the pace of life.